Hello everyone and welcome back to e-commerce clearly. For the past few weeks on e-commerce clearly, we've been talking about a lot of reports. We've looked at data, consumer trends, market growth, quick commerce and all the different things that are shaping Indian e-commerce. But this week I came across something that made me think about a completely different question. A couple of days ago I read that Wipro Consumer Care is acquiring a 60% stake in a skincare brand named Dermatouch for around 387.5 crore. And something about that article just stuck with me. Not necessarily the acquisition itself, but the fact that I've been seeing so many of these stories lately. Marico investing in cosmetics, USV acquiring a majority stake in Wellbeing Nutrition, HUL acquiring and buying out kind of minimalist, and Marico building out its portfolio of digital first brands, and Wipro Consumer Care making yet another move into a new consumer category with Dermatouch. And it's not just FMCG, you have Reliance investing across consumer, beauty, fashion, and retail. You have Tata getting into different consumer categories. You have Aditya Birla Group participating in new age consumer businesses. You have Nike acquiring and investing in beauty and fashion brands. You have Tira building its own beauty ecosystem. And if you actually start scrolling through the news, the list just keeps going. Beauty brands, skincare brands, nutrition brands, supplement brands, healthy food brands, personal care brands, fashion brands, home and lifestyle brands. The categories keep changing, but the pattern is remarkably similar. A large established company is looking at a younger digitally native brand and saying, there is something here that we want. And that got me thinking, what exactly is it that they want? Because let's look at the two sides. On one side, you have companies that have been around for decades. Some of these companies have been building consumer businesses for 30, 40, 50, sometimes even 100 years. They have distribution, they have manufacturing, they have capital, they have relationships with retailers, they have thousands of employees, they have enormous consumer reach. They understand how to take a product from one part of the country to another. They know how to build supply chains. They know how to operate at scale. But then you have this completely different generation of companies. Companies that were born on Instagram, companies that started on Shopify, companies that figured out Amazon before traditional brands really understood what marketplaces could become, companies that built communities before they had massive distribution, companies that understood younger consumers, companies that entered categories that weren't necessarily mainstream 10 years ago. And these brands move differently. They can launch products quickly, they can test a product, they can kill it, they can build a community around it, they can speak to consumers in a completely different language, and they often have something that is incredibly difficult for a large organization to manufacture internally: relevance. And I think that's the interesting part of this entire story, because I don't think the answer is that big FMCG companies don't know how to innovate. That's too simplistic. I think the bigger question is, how quickly can a massive organization build something that a 5-year-old company has already spent 5 years figuring out? If you're a large company and you want to enter a new category, you can build from scratch. You can hire a team, you can create a product, you can build distribution, you can spend years figuring out the customer. Or you can find a company that's already done all of that. You can invest in it, you can acquire it, you can bring it into your portfolio. And suddenly, instead of building the capability from zero, you're buying something that already has a consumer, a product, a brand, and a story. And we've seen these acquisitions start to become meaningful businesses within the larger parents. An Economic Times analysis in July found that a group of digital first brands, including Minimalist, Oziva, Beardo, Yoga Bar, Mother's Purse, Plix, True Elements, Cosmix, and 4700 BC together generated more than 2000 crore revenue in FY26, growing more than 20% year on year. So, this isn't just a story about large companies buying small brands and putting them on a shelf. Some of these brands are actually becoming important growth engines inside these larger organizations, and that makes the whole thing even more interesting. Because if I'm a founder listening to all of this, I start wondering, is this actually the natural end game of building a D2C brand today? You start small, you build a product, you find your consumer, you build build distribution, you scale, you become profitable, or at least demonstrate enough growth, and eventually a much larger company comes knocking and you sell. Now, before I go any further, I want to make one thing very clear. I don't think there is anything wrong with that. In fact, I think an exit can be an incredible outcome. Imagine spending 10 or 15 years building a business. You've taken all the risk, you've put in your own money into it, you've convinced people to join you, you've dealt with inventory problems, cash flow problems, hiding problems, product failures, marketing failures. You have gone through all of it, and eventually someone comes along and says, we want to buy what you've built. That's not failure, that's validation. And financially it can completely change your life. You get liquidity, you get financial security, you might get the opportunity to start something completely different. You might be able to invest in other founders, you might be able to take a break. Finally, you might even continue running the business, but now with significantly more resources behind you. And sometimes the acquisition can actually be good for the brand itself, because suddenly the brand has access to a much larger distribution network, more capital, more manufacturing, more retail, more supply chain capabilities, more geographic research. So selling doesn't necessarily mean I built it and now I'm done. Sometimes it can also mean I built it to a point where it can now become much bigger than what I could have built on my own. And that's a very compelling argument. But then there's the other side, and this is where I get conflicted. Because what if you don't want to sell? What if you spent 10 years building something and it has become more than a business? It's your product, your brand, your team, your consumers, your story, your identity. And suddenly someone comes along and offers you a very large check, and everyone around you says, how can you possibly say no? But you still don't want to, because you're not looking at the company as an asset. You're looking at it as something you've built, something you've nurtured, something you want to see become bigger. And maybe you want to be the person who runs it over the next 20 years. Maybe you want your brand to exist 30 years from now. Maybe you want to build something that becomes bigger than you. And that's where I think the founder psychology becomes really interesting, because there are broadly two ways of thinking about entrepreneurship. One is, I want to build something valuable, and if someone wants to buy it at the right price, great. The other is, I want to build something that lasts, and if someone wants to buy it, my first instinct might be to say no. Neither is wrong, but they can lead to very different decisions. Because if you know that your eventual goal is an acquisition, you might think about the business differently. You might think about the category you are entering, you might think about how quickly you need to scale, you might think about the metrics that strategic buyers care about, you might think about what makes you attractive to a larger company. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's a very different mindset from saying I am going to build this business for the next 30 years. Because then you're thinking about longevity, you're thinking about succession, you're thinking about building an institution, you're thinking about a brand that can survive beyond its founder. And I think there's another interesting question here. Are founders actually starting businesses with an exit in mind? Or is the exit simply becoming the most visible definition of success? Because when you constantly see stories about founders selling companies for hundreds or thousands of crores, it's easy to start thinking, this is what winning looks like: build, scale, raise, grow, exit, and repeat. And the Indian D2C ecosystem has now matured enough that we have seen multiple versions of these stories: Minimalist, Beardo, Plix, True Elements, Yoga Bar, Oziva, Cosmics, Mother Splash, 4700 BC, and now Derma Touch. Different categories, different founders, different business models, different stages. But increasingly, we are seeing these brands become part of much larger consumer companies, and that's not even counting the many investments where a company hasn't necessarily acquired 100%. Marico, for example, has explicitly followed a strategy of taking stakes in digital first brands and working with founders to scale them before potentially offering a complete exit. And I think that model is particularly interesting, because it doesn't necessarily say we're buying your company and you're leaving. It says we are investing in what you've built and we are going to help you scale it. And maybe that's actually the future. Maybe the future isn't always founder builds, big company buys, founder leaves. Maybe it's founder builds, strategic investor comes in, founder continues building, brand gets scales, and both sides benefit. And that to me is a much more interesting model, because then the founder gets access to resources without necessarily giving up everything they've built. But it also raises another question: what exactly are these large companies buying? Is it the product? Is it the revenue? Is it the distribution? Is it the brand? Is it the consumer? Is it the founder? Is it the innovation? Or is it simply the speed at which company has figured out a market? And I actually think it's a combination of all of this. Because if you are a legacy consumer company, you don't necessarily need another shampoo brand. You need to know who is the next customer. What are they buying? Why are they buying it? Where are they discovering it? What categories are they spending on? What language are they responding to? What kind of products are they willing to pay a premium for? And new age brands are often sitting right in the middle of those answers. That's why we are seeing this across so many categories. It's not just beauty, it's not just skincare, it's not just supplements, it's not just food. It's fashion, wellness, personal care, it's home, it's lifestyle. It's basically whenever a new consumer behavior is emerging, and that's why I don't think this acquisition trend is going away anytime soon. If anything, I think we'll continue to see more of it, because India has an enormous number of new consumer brands getting created every day, and large companies have enormous amount of capital, distribution, and scale sitting on the other side. At some point these two things are naturally going to meet. But here's the part I keep coming back to: what does the founder want? Because the market can tell you what a company is worth, an investor can tell you what they think the company is worth, an acquirer can tell you what they are willing to pay, but only the founder can decide what the company is worth to them. And maybe that's the part we don't talk about enough. We talk about valuation, we talk about revenue, we talk about multiples, we talk about acquisition numbers, we talk about how much a founder made, but we don't talk enough about the emotional side of an exit, because there is a very real difference between them. I built this company so that someone could eventually buy it, and I built this company because I loved building it, and someone eventually offered to buy it. These are two very different stories, and personally, I don't think which one I believe in. Because as someone who's building in this ecosystem, I absolutely know that an acquisition is always a possibility. If you're building a business, you can't pretend that exits don't exist. But I also don't want the possibility of an exit to become the reason for building the business. And maybe that's the distinction I'm trying to make. Build something that's valuable enough to be acquired, but not necessarily build something just to be acquired. Build the brand, build the product, build the consumer base, build the team, build the economics, build something that can survive. And then, if one day someone comes along and says, we want to buy this, you get to make a choice. You can say yes, you can say no, you can negotiate, you can take a minority investment, you can continue running it, you can walk away. But at least the decision is being made from a position of strength, not because the entire business was designed around finding an exit. And maybe that's what I find most interesting about this entire wave of acquisitions. It's not really about whether founders should sell, it's not about whether large FMCGs are good or bad for D2C brands, it's not even about whether acquisitions are the future. It's about what we're collectively starting to define as success in entrepreneurship. Is success an exit? Is success building a company that lasts for 30 years? Is success creating a brand that becomes a household name? Is success financial freedom? Is success creating brands? Is success creating something that didn't exist before? Or is success simply having the freedom to choose what happens next? And I genuinely don't think there is one right answer. Some founders will build to sell, some will build to last, some will build without knowing what they want, and some will build something so good that they'll have the luxury of deciding later. And maybe that's the best place to be, because ultimately, I don't think the question is, are we building to get acquired or are we building to last? I think the better question is, what are we actually building for? Because two founders can build almost identical businesses, same category, same revenue, same growth, same team, same valuation, and one might be waiting for the right acquisition offer while the other won't sell at any price. From the outside, you might not see the difference, but for the founder, the difference is everything. And the question I've been thinking about this week, not because I have an answer, but genuinely because I don't have an answer. And maybe that's what makes it worth talking about. If you are building a D2C brand today, would you build it to sell or would you build it to last? And maybe that's actually what makes this conversation so interesting. Maybe there isn't one right answer. Maybe some of us will build to sell, some of us will build to last, and some of us will just keep finding building and figuring it out along the way. Because at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is to build something that genuinely you're proud of, something that creates value, solves a real problem, and hopefully stands the test of time. If an acquisition comes along someday, maybe you'll say yes, maybe you'll say no. But until then, keep growing, keep experimenting, and keep building. I'll see you in the next episode of E Commerce Clearly. Bye bye.